Welcome to the Brothers War podcast. Welcome. Episode number 1. My name is Ryan. I'm joined by Chris. What's going on, Chris?
What's going on, y'all? My name is Chris, aka C Daddy. Here to here to bring y'all some a podcast. We've been talking about it for a while, and I'm finally excited to get it underway. And I hope you guys enjoy it.
Yeah, especially to share your thoughts, because I know you have a lot of thoughts on the game, and we're definitely going to get into those in here. I'm also joined by the legend Blake. He's back. Y'all wanted him. He's here. We got him.
Get rid of Chris. I would be a more mainstay.
What? Stop acting like you hate me, Blake.
Not necessarily that I hate you. It's just what comes out of your mouth.
Yes, sir.
Understandable. Well, without further ado, let's get this thing started. So it is the first episode. Blake, I'm sorry, I got to put you on the spot. How'd you get into Magic?
Good question. So let's see. My Magic journey goes all the way back to camp in Arkansas in the middle of summer. So the first introduction I ever remember was a Christian summer camp that my parents would send me to that had we would go there, basically just middle of Arkansas, where there was just a bunch of cabins and everything, and you had a troop leader and everything. Not my general scene that you would see me in now, but this is just some place that my parents would send me to get me out of the house, since I just wanted to stay in and play Game Boy and shit. So but I remember I was specifically on the deck, and I had met a couple of guys there, and they pulled out a deck of cards, and I was like, that doesn't look like playing cards. And they had weird creatures and demonic symbols on them at the time, and I was like, what the hell is this? And that was really my first ever introduction to the game. Didn't know anything, didn't know how to play, just saw them slinging spells, and I was like, I don't know what this is. Fast forward to college, when I got my roommate, he also was a more avid player than at the time, and I just knew it casually, because from that I basically looked it up, knew what it was, never looked at it again. So in college in Danville, Kentucky, there was one LGS that my friend took me to, and it was the set release for Rise of the Eldrazi. That was the first set I ever did anything with. We did a draft. I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't even know what lands did at the time. And basically, from that particular instance in Rise of the Eldrazi, I then built a standard deck using the Titans of M11 at that time. So I was playing with Sheoldred and Primeval Titan and that sort of thing. It was a really bad standard deck, something that I had just put together with cards that I basically opened in between that release and where I started playing, and where I started really playing in the Mirrodin block. It was that's probably where my real intro starts, was just being shown cards, and eventually got back to it in college, and then ever since then I basically just collected and played on and off all these years.
One of the first times I met you, we were I think we were doing I'm pretty sure we were doing a draft. The first time that I met you at the card shop, I want to say, and this was before we even moved in together, because we all used to live together in this apartment.
Chris was obviously during. I'm sure he'll tell this story at Firebirds, and then that was where I knew he had a brother that also played, because we had originally actually met over Hearthstone, and
I see.
That was where the bond, so to speak, comes from. Is that question that he asked me when I was a new server? I don't remember. I cannot remember our first interaction. It would make sense that it's a draft, though. I just don't know.
Yeah. What was the card? What was the shop called? Jupiter Comics.
Yes.
Jupiter Comics. Yeah. I think it was Cons of Tarkir. That was almost 10 years ago.
Man.
Yes. What a shame.
and the glow up.
Wild to think about, you know.
It is wild.
I mean, at this point, it's you're running up on a third of my life that I've known you.
Yeah.
It's true. That sounds like a pretty long career. We drafted a lot back in the day, man. Like
Oh, that was mainly how we played. Was
Yeah.
I don't
it
think
was.
really play any
We
games
draft
at the moment.
we drafted in standard.
For us making fun of commander players.
We did.
I'm not playing this constructed format that
Yeah,
has 100
I remember that
cards.
too.
Yeah.
in. No way we
Yeah.
do that. If we're doing anything, I'm playing like modern or standard or something like that.
Yeah.
I remember in the cons block, I remember playing black blue delve with dig through time in standard.
We gotta say it. The reason why we're back into EDH, I think at least at the start was because Blake bought those 2016 precons.
That's true.
Just as a gift, like, yeah, let's just try it out, and then send. And you know, Chris and I played it before, but we were deep into the draft, a little bit of standard. I did one standard tournament one time at that store. Ended up winning the whole thing. I got no prize. But yeah, if it wasn't for Blake, I don't know. I mean, you know, we probably would have found our way back. But I think that Blake really jump started that. But
Dude,
but yeah,
that's such a good time. Like our 16 precons, like were like slappers. My only complaint is like each deck had like 8 board wipes, so it was just games were so long because
I was
just all
talking to
playing
Josh.
precons.
I was talking to Josh the other day about it. I was like, you remember when we would all go to the apartment and we'd be sleeping at the table because it was 3 o'clock in the morning because the games would never end.
Yeah, for sure.
literally,
For sure.
dude, they lasted so long. And it's funny. It's funny how the meta kind of changed in our group because it was like heavy board wipes, and then one of our friends, Henry, started playing with us, and he was playing like really good decks, and we're like, oh my gosh, now we get. And that's when like the power creep started happening. Blake started spending like $5,000 on his deck, and then we're all trying to keep up. Games got faster, combos were going pretty heavy. And then there was a period where we kind of stopped doing a lot of the broken stuff, and we were trying to do kind of just like, you know, it kind of like mid games. But you know, I'd say now, you know, at least for me, you know, I definitely like playing with power.
Story follows just about every play group I
Yeah.
can think of.
Yeah, it's like a sine wave.
Yeah, you're literally just playing precons and having fun, and somebody comes in. And actually, it's funny you say that. Henry is definitely our catalyst because at that point, I think I only had the Atraxa deck, and I remember watching him play and his like, you know, synergy driven decks, and I'd be like, man, because that was where I built the first deck that still remains to this day, and that was Gitrog turned into Muldrotha.
Yeah.
In Dominaria, and that's a deck I still maintain to this day. That was where like my first real purchase after I like actually started the big boy job to where I could afford like real cards, because that was where Sylvan Library came in, Mana Drain came in. I bought the original Vorn Collects for that deck because again, really my card pool consisted of like all the rares and mythics from like standard, which usually aren't good enough for like, you know, CEDH nowadays. Obviously, now we did play in cons block, so I did have a lot of fetches and stuff like that. But like, you know, that was where I truly started buying staples, and like decks turned into like an actual like labor of love instead of just throwing cards together and trying to play games. It became about, you know, what's my most efficient play? How can I, you know, truly build my deck to get where I want.
Yeah. Speaking of the oldest decks, what's the oldest deck you have, Chris?
Hapatra. That's the oldest one I have. That was the first. No, sorry, that was the second deck that I actually made. I was upgrading the precon that Blake got me, the Brea one, and the one I actually put together from scratch was Hapatra. That was the first deck I actually put together from scratch.
It's a good one. Yeah, mine was Jorah. Rest in peace. I don't even want to bring that deck back anymore, especially when Paradox Engine was still unbanned. Man, we're talking about the wheels were spinning and they weren't going anywhere.
Yes.
And I would just fizzle out like 80% of the time.
How many cards can I draw in before I die, kind of thing?
I think that's, you know, kind of where we are now. We want to make optimal decks. You know, well, yeah, and like we can have fun,
yeah.
But like having fun now is being able to have just a really, really powerful, strong, you know, finely tuned deck that you put a lot of time and effort into.
The priorities have changed over the years because the goal of EDH has changed over the years for all of us. Like I said, between buying the 2016 precons to where we stand today, we've gone through a huge meta shift, multiple meta shifts where, like I said, it started out creature based board wipes. Everybody then went to combos with no creatures, and then you've got people pivoting back to creatures because nobody's putting up any defenses, so people are dying on like turn 6, and
Yeah.
you've got all the meta swings. Nobody owned a mana crew. Nobody even knew what Chromox was. That sort of thing. So we've got, I think, the normal power shift that I feel like most tables experience that of like adults, where once you can start actually affording cards and stuff, eventually someone's going to try to optimize and everyone's going to try to meet them. But I think that's where the paradigm, as of recent, within the last year or so, is like kind of swapped around. Where like Chris and I specifically play a fair amount of CDH, and that scratches my competitive itch to where I don't want all my decks to be like that. I don't necessarily, not that I don't want to play optimally, but it's that, you know, there are certain decks that I have now that I'm looking for like certain play patterns instead of wanting to build every deck to a certain standard. There are some some decks that I want to be able to take to a local game store when I'm traveling and be able to play against anybody. There are some decks that I want to take to a CDH tournament and try to win. I think the way I used to build was to one paradigm. Now I feel like, and I think this is true for most of us, that we all, maybe not Ryan since he doesn't deck build as much as we do, but that I think all my decks have a specific goal in mind and the way play pattern that I'm looking for, and so they've been heavily tuned down or around that specific theme.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah, it's cool that you kind of have two different buckets now. You have one where if you wanted to go and play just like crazy, try to win to the best way you can, you have a deck for that. But then you have other decks that do other things.
Staples are staples for a reason. Once you start getting into that 5-6 region, any old pile of cards isn't going to cut it anymore. Now, don't get me wrong, the entire world doesn't understand what an actual power scale is. So anybody who says they have a 5 to a 7, you truly have no idea what they actually have, considering the shift to webcam magic for me has been really one that has frustrated me more than anything else, because you put up a room asking for a certain thing, and you'll get people that are coming in there, well, I'm just going to play one spell a turn and I have nothing that can interact with you, so I just would like to play my deck and leave me alone. It's just, coming from, because like I said, and I think it's funny, I think all of our, where we started in Magic reflects how we like to play EDH, where a lot of us started in constructed formats, specifically playing LGSs to win, draft, standard, pauper, modern, that sort of thing. Ultimately, the way I interact with this game is, and I don't necessarily need to win, but I do want to play optimally and, interact with my opponent, because ultimately that's how you play the game. In Sorry, I don't, when I'm playing a board game, I don't choose to not interact with my opponents because I'm concerned about their well-being. Ultimately the game is to set them back as much as possible and to me win, as that ultimately, that's the thing. So I think it's funny that when we bring this up, it's like I care about people's play experience now more than I did before, but I also don't care at the same time, because ultimately we are playing a game. And I'm sorry that I interacted with your commander on turn 4, because it's by far the best thing I can be doing that turn.
Right.
Ultimately, you need to get over that and understand that that is just the correct thing for me to do in that scenario, whether you agree with it or not, and you need to be okay with it.
I think that there's people that are like, they get salty because you literally are just interacting with their stuff. It's not like you're like pub stomping them with like Turgid or or you're doing, you're like winning on like turn 3, and that's all the games are. But it's like, so someone plays they're like 6 mana creature, and then end of their turn, oh yeah, I'm gonna swords that because it's it's good, and it's like, it could be the only threat on the table, and then that by itself causes them to not only be salty against you, but also potentially, just want to focus on you. I think that people just don't like being interacted with, and kind of like piggybacking on what Blake said, I feel like people that are like, oh well, I care about people's play experiences. I think people take that and they're like, if you cared, then you would let me do what my deck is trying to do. But that's not this game. Like, this game has interaction for a reason. If you have like freaking one deck that's actually running interaction, and the others are just like battle cruiser like Magic, all of them are probably like, oh well, we know that this guy runs a lot of interaction, so let's just maybe we can just get him out of here, and then we can all just play our game, and then whoever happens to win in the end, will do it. Just don't mess with my stuff. But that's the game, man.
Yeah, I think that's the reason why having a group of friends that you consistently play with is important, because especially when you're playing on like Blake mentioned, spell table, these are just a bunch of random people, and oftentimes when Blake and I get into a pod, like, it's just me and him playing, interacting. Everybody's like again, like, just they put too much emotion. They tie too much emotion to their deck, which, I mean, I completely understand. But again, this goes back to the playgroup thing. Like, find a group of friends, find a group of people that you relate to in a lot of ways with Magic, and competitive nature, or casual nature. Kind of cultivate that environment in your group, and get the best, so you can get the best play experience. But as far as our group is concerned, it's really hard kind of to join a random pod of people, because we try to make the most optimized plays, and sometimes it doesn't. Oftentimes it could be seen as maybe taking a salty, or making a salty, making someone salty. So I think that again, it just goes back to trying to find a group of people who you relate to, good friends with, and then just play with them as your play group.
I've played on like spell table games, and like games from like the freaking LGS, and you're doing something so small, like, okay, well, let's say I'm playing a deck that plays a lot of creatures, and it's doing really efficient stuff, like Land War Elves into 2-drop, 3-drop, and then ramp into like Orin Frostfang, draw like 5 cards. And some people are like, man, that's just too fast. Like, it's like this is like I don't get how this is problematic to you. Like I think that like some people, they're like, okay, well, I have this deck that is it's quirky, and it's supposed to be a funny deck, but then you have someone else's deck that it's just trying to win, but it's not too oppressive. And they're like, oh, well, I thought that we were just trying to have fun. But it's like, the goal of the game is to win. The goal of the game is to win, and is to bring the other opponent's life totals down to 0. And yeah, like, it's like what you're saying. Someone can find a group where they're all just playing decks that are fun and quirky, and do funny things. Which which is why it is probably hard for a lot of people who probably don't have a lot of friends just hopping into like spell table. And Blake brought up the thing about the power levels that I think is very important. How we made a short about this not too long ago, but describing your deck by power level it was cool in the beginning, but I think that it's so ambiguous now. Like you really don't know.
I'll
And
be
also,
honest, it's just cringe nowadays. Like
Yeah.
it's like, oh, look at me, I have a quirky 6. It's like ultimately, and again, I think this goes back to where we originally started the podcast: is what does your background look like? If you started EDH without any competitive experience, if you don't know what it's like to play a 60 card deck and sit across from one person and specifically try to beat them competitively, I think you have a completely different outlook on the game ultimately. Now, not to say that someone can't start with EDH and get there, but I think you look at the game more like I think those sort of players look at it more like a board game. So I think that's where, like I said, we are very biased on this channel and this podcast specifically because we all come from 60 card formats, because we come from competitive nature, because we're all friends, and specifically, half the reason I play games with you idiots is to beat you.
Sure.
I have a specific goal in mind that I want from my games, and when I step into a spell table game, I could be playing somebody that literally this is their first deck and they like goblins and they just put everything in the deck that has goblin, which is fine, which is the reason that power levels are a thing, but it's become such a warped term, and what people don't understand is I can play powerful cards, but if my end goal is different than you, my power level is ultimately different. If I'm just, I can have a tuned, optimized goblin deck that's just trying to have fun and not really like, if I don't ultimately have any interaction or like anything that deals with the board or any sort of thing, and I'm just playing, doing the thing that I built it for, regardless of the good or bad cards in it, I think your deck falls basically down to battle cruiser, regardless what's in it,
Mhm.
because ultimately, at least coming from the way I look at power levels, if you can't interact, if you can't stop somebody doing something, you shouldn't be above a 5. Even the
Interesting.
precons are built with somewhere between 5 and 10 pieces of interaction. And I know I've been in spell table games where people like are upset that someone has cast one piece. Like it's just, I think like that's where I know we specifically will deviate from, or at least we have a specific bias when we build decks. I would say on average, and you guys can chime in here, I would say my specific most decks I would want somewhere between 10 to 20 pieces of interaction based on the deck strategy and what synergies I'm looking for. Because that's the other thing that people don't realize is there is a way to build interaction while still building around synergy.
Yes.
People, you don't just have to run every removal spell an instant if you're a creature deck. There are plenty of creatures nowadays that will interact and will ultimately increase the synergy of your deck. Everybody's just so like gung-ho on specific staples, on specific removal pieces. It's like I have to have these because they're the ones that you run, but ultimately you can build your deck with more synergy that also includes more removal, and ultimately your play experience will be better if you're trying to play like we want to play. That's where I want to be very specific here, because ultimately EDH is what you make of it.
Yeah.
And if you want to play a deck that just does its thing and Rube Goldberg's and doesn't interact with anybody, that's okay. But you need to be in the right spot for it, because if I queue into a spell table game with you and you've joined my 7 to 8 power level, you are fucking my game up because you are not doing ultimately what I was hoping for. And that's where Chris, you might have something to say about this, but I think ultimately if you can't play on that axis, you can't be above a 5. I don't care what cards you have in your deck.
You heard it here.
That's a very interesting comment to me.
Like I said, you're welcome to disagree with it. I just think that's
no.
my take on it.
I can't disagree with it because I see what you're saying, and but the problem is a 5. Like again, the power level scale is just so subjective. Like my 5 might be different than your 5. You know what I'm saying? Like, so I as far as what you said, the comment that you said, I agree. I think that your deck is not powerful enough to compete at just a high power table or high power casual table if you don't run any interaction. Now there is and I'm talking about specifically, kind of like, high power casual. There is some arguments for people who don't run any interaction in CEDH and just try to win as fast as you can, turn 1, turn 2.
Sure,
But even then, you have your cards that are able to protect, like the
Right.
Force of Wills. So that's still interaction. So
like I said, that's ultimately the thing, is because what you're talking about specifically is a linear deck build where you are specifically trying to do your one thing. You don't care what happens, but ultimately, like, take our games of CDH that we play. Do you have you ever run into any linear deck that doesn't run some interaction?
No,
Everybody
never.
is at least at the bare minimum they are trying to protect their combo, and that in and of itself is interaction.
Yes,
Which
yes.
I'm fine. Which that is acceptable. Now, ultimately, I think, especially with the trend that I've seen as of recent, where we're kind of moving, CDH is moving more towards creatures, away from spells, and that sort of thing, where you've got enough decks in the format now that are slowing down and building a more mid-game presence. I think that you basically, linear decks are a thing of the past. I mean,
Yeah.
specifically not to make this a CDH podcast, but specifically my Kark Sakashima deck that I play has pivoted wildly from when it first was iterated and I was building off Ken Bauman's first list. It was a linear deck just trying to do its one thing, with basically the only interaction I was really playing was to protect my specific linear combo. It's moved more into a mid-range control deck nowadays that's actually playing for more value and that sort of thing, because that's just the way the format has gone, and that you kind of need to play because ultimately everybody is trying to execute on that plan, and you need to be able to have the resources to interact, because the first person that goes off basically will never win, because everybody is set up for that, because that's the expectation of the game, which is ultimately why I think CDH players have it right, because they have a goal in mind that all 4 players that come to any table, if you say CDH, are trying to win the game and get there the best, and I think they build their deck around that properly. So you're going to end up with the best games in that format because everybody's on that same page,
Right.
and everybody's doing what you want.
Yeah.
Whereas random spell table 6-7, it varies so wildly that it goes from, like, I've had a great time to I shouldn't have even booted up my computer. It was a complete waste of my time.
Yeah.
Outside of just interacting with you, that was the only benefit I got out of the night.
I think the biggest thing that separates CEDH and casual is just the mindset. Like, you could play casual decks with a competitive mindset. You know what I mean? You can make sure that you're playing your even if the deck's not fully optimized. I still consider that competitive commander. Because Blake and I, our friend group, I would consider our mindset a competitive mindset, even though we don't have, maybe some of us don't have the most optimized decks. I still think that it boils down to and what can kind of take away from the salt inducing games is your mindset when you come into the game.
Right.
If you're there, if everybody's there and they have, let's say, they have 5 power level decks, but they're all there to win. Shoot, I mean, it may not be good competitive decks, but I still consider that competitive commander.
Yeah, for sure.
They would definitely be running interaction. Something that Blake brought up too, how when you go into like spell table, and it's like, oh yeah, we're playing like 6 to 7 or whatever, but then you go in, and then you have the amount of players that might have better decks compared to other players. It does kind of ruin it a little more for you, because if you're doing well, but other players aren't, because their decks aren't like tuned enough, or maybe they're not like as experienced enough. If it's not in a competitive setting, it is kind of hurting you, because if you're getting like really ahead, or if you're showing that you're probably like knowledgeable, and those players that don't have interaction, they can't help you against the other players that are probably also on the same competitive mindset as you. So it definitely hurts you in the end. If everyone is on the same level with the same mindset of like, we're all trying to win, all the decks are optimized the most that the best way that they can be, and all of the expectations are there, those are probably more likely going to be the best. And that doesn't have to be in competitive, like what Chris was saying. You can play well optimized lower power decks, as long as if everyone has the same mindset and are like relatively around the same level, which is why it's important to find a friend group that is probably around the same. You're probably going to get the best experience.
Mindset. Make sure that the play group that you have has the same mindset.
Yeah, that's agree.
Even if you have, let's say, even if you have those off balance decks, there's an understanding there that, oh, they came to win and I lost. If ultimately if I lose the game, it's because they came to win and my deck wasn't good enough. And that should be less salt-inducing, in my opinion, to have 4 players sit down at a table and be like, oh, we're all here to win the game. Regardless of how we do it, this is what we came to do. And I think that separates the casual mindset from the competitive mindset. And again, it doesn't even. I think it's less about the deck's power level and more about the mindset.
Completely agree. It's just like there's nothing more frustrating from my end when we queue into a spell table and it just ends up being like Chris said earlier this game, where it's basically just me versus him because the other 2 people are either not in their right power level category, they're not interacting, they're not doing anything, they're not even close to winning. Whereas, a lot of my decks tend to go 1 for 1 because I'm usually built around, and then just having recursion engines to get back that 1 for 1s usually, so I end up winning out. But in that sort of scenario, Chris plays synergy piece after synergy piece because that's usually how all of his decks are, where each individual piece is not necessarily the most powerful, which and is innocuous, but you put enough of them together and Chris has this unbeatable engine that you can't do anything about. So I'm sitting there trying to 1 for 1 him, and everybody else just isn't in that mindset or is doing their own thing. So it just becomes a completely different game where, and this is again mostly on us because I think you can kind of build for this or you can curate for this sort of thing, but it's hard when it becomes about webcam magic and that sort of thing because then you have the social aspect moved into it. But I get punished for that mindset because not everybody else is doing that and they're off doing their own thing. So it becomes a completely different game where I'm the only one, I'm quote unquote the only fun police at the table where I'm trying to police because Chris tends to usually play more linear with protection than just like straight up 1 for 1 like I do. So it just ends up becoming, can I stop him before he wins? Or are one of the other 2 people going to actually do anything that makes the game? But it just ultimately usually boils down to me versus him because we specifically have that competitive mindset where not necessarily everybody else does, or they're just either in the wrong category because they don't. If you didn't listen to any of this, the only thing you would need to take away from this is power level is in the mindset, not the cards. You can play competitive at any level with the right mindset and the right deck building. It doesn't matter the power level of your cards. Ultimately, removal spells, they're cheap, they're fast, they're quick. You can play that at any power level. Ultimately, whether you're playing staples or not, you can be a better deck builder and a better competitive player at any stage of your Magic career. It's all about the mindset and the people that you play with that will ultimately decide how you experience the game of EDH.
It's beautiful. That's beautifully said. Beautifully said.
Very beautifully said.
I just want to say on the topic of CDH just for a little bit. So Blake said that he plays Clark Sakashima. Chris, how many CDH decks do you have?
I have decks that I would like to consider CDH. That really aren't CDH. They're like
you could call them fringe, probably.
Yeah, you think so? Maybe. I would say my best CDH deck is probably Niv Mizzet Perrin, or Perun, however you say it. But I'd like to play. It would change if I actually went to a tournament. Uh, I would probably play Niv Mizzet if I went to a tournament, but casually when I'm like trying to play for fun, I'm playing like very, very off the wall decks just because I like the challenge. So that's what even I don't like. I don't mind losing, and actually I feel like losing is a good experience because you think about what do I do? What did I do here wrong? What other cards how do I correct this? How do I get better at this decision point? Or did you just think about all these different things of how you can make your deck better, how you can become a better deck builder, how you can become a better player. And I think that's the reason why I like to play these like really off the wall decks is because it makes me a better player and deck builder.
Dude, not to get all psychological, but that is a mindset that is very uncommon in our format, I feel like, and gaming in general, any multiplayer game. No one wants accountability. Everyone wants to blame outward. No one wants to be introspective and ask the question, what could have I done better? What if I had built my deck different? What if I had played this differently? Introspection is such a uncommon trait I find nowadays that and that's ultimately what makes you a better player because you can't account for what other people are going to do or what cards they're going to draw. You can only control yourself, your deck, and how you play.
Yeah.
And introspection is by far the biggest skill to increasing one's ability to play.
I need to take that into account for sure. Yeah, Chris, a lot of your decks have good views on Moxfield. I've noticed the fringe ones, especially.
The fringe ones, yeah.
Because I know that the Ob Nixilis one, the one with the suit.
Yeah, Nixilis, the captive kingpin.
Yeah, like don't you have like the one of the highest viewed ones?
Let's see, I have 8,881. The next one is 5,813.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, because you had Ob Nixilis, you had Jaheira Gildarson, which I think it might be one of the strongest ones, the strongest fringe ones you had.
Yeah, I love brewing the freaking 2-color background. I think they're underexplored in CDH, and I'm just trying to break them. And
Chris is a hipster through and through.
I am a hipster.
Like literally, all I can think of are the memes where it's just like, no, not that, like not the common command. If I go to EDH Rec and there's 10 commanders for this color, already out the door. No way will I play any of those. I am going to the bottom of the list, and I'm
yes. I'm digging. I'm scooping
I'm gonna
from
make
the bottom,
you feel
baby.
like absolute garbage because I ain't playing nothing you ever seen.
Yes. Yeah.
God damn it, I hate it.
One thing about CEDH is that I think Brewer's Advantage is so underappreciated, undervalued. I think that
what is that?
So Brewer's Advantage is when you, like what Blake was mentioning, you have never played the deck before, you don't know what it does, and nobody knows how to interact with it. So basically you can kind of fly under the radar when you're playing against Timna Krom, Najila, or Sisay or whatever, and try to win through being innocuous.
Absolutely.
There's a little hit you're taking. There's quite a big hit you're taking actually, because you're usually playing a deck that's not powerful, but maybe you can kind of sneak a win in there every now and again. That's why I said if I was to play in an actual tournament, I probably wouldn't play those fringe decks, but I like kind of like having that surprise factor when I'm playing casual competitive EDH.
Well, again, related to how competitive decks are, think like
Right.
when you're actually in a tournament setting with open deck lists, your mindset changes completely because I know exactly what you're playing. I know exactly what you could have, and I would play around it. Where if you're just playing some unknown quantity with 100 cards I have no idea about, and you're not playing any, I know what most CDH decks are going to be roughly playing when I sit down, but usually when I sit down across from you, it's like, what in the world could possibly be in this fucking thing? What fringe card has Chris found a way to break?
Yes.
It's funny because I think Chris mentioned Hamza not too long ago. It's those stupid like 1 mana graft or something. It's something just so like, and you play it, and then you're probably playing with like some other CDH people, and they're like, this guy is a hipster, but then they're so focused on like Blue Farm and everyone else.
The thing with the fringe decks is that you have to make sure you know when to pivot to have the explosive turn. You have to know when you're like, when you pull the trigger and you're like, okay, this is my time to go, and then you go for it, because you can't gradually do it. Basically, you have to do it. The only time you really have is the first couple turns, and then after that, usually you're dead by then. But that's why I said fringe is kind of it's hard to play.
Well, it doesn't help that your fringe also doesn't play blue.
Very true.
So
Very
that
true.
is a color, and CDH is kind of a relevant.
It's less forgiving, or it's more forgiving when you play blue.
100%, because ultimately you can play whatever. My counterspell is still it's still 100% effective.
It still stops win
Right.
counts.
Yes. Whereas specifically your color combo of choice tends to be like Gruul, and that is known for not interacting on the stack very well.
Yeah.
There might be like one of the worst combinations of colors in CDH, as far as like 2+.
Green and red, like especially red. Red nowadays is like the color.
Yeah.
Blue is. I actually think. Again, I'm not trying to make this a CDH podcast, but I think blue's fallen off a lot as of recent. Like, really, blue is relevant because it can interact on the stack. That's really the only reason. Mm-hmm. And it's half of the best win con in the format. Yeah. And that's why blue is still relevant. Wizards has done a very good job as of recent at propping up the 2 worst colors, which was red, white. And I think so. They're some of the best colors nowadays.
White has gotten so much over the past couple of years. Now I'm waiting on green to get something, because green hasn't gotten much at all recently.
Dude, where are my black mages at? Come on,
dude.
My CDH deck that I built and then changed again has been Duretti Scrap Savant. Has won on this channel, by the way. And a lot of people in the comments were roasting me for my play. Still ended up winning.
He just wanted to get that out.
He just wanted to get that out.
I did. Mono red. Like, there's just something about being able to win the hardest way possible. That it's just I don't know. It's probably not right.
I think my views are starting to change on that. I think. And I hate to say this because I really want to. I really wish it wasn't the case, but I think that thinking that I can, play from under the floorboards and maybe sneak out a win is more of a casual mindset. When Blake and I go to the next tournament next year, I'll probably be bringing
again. Ultimately, the more colors you bring in, the more options you have. The better. I don't like 5-color piles.
Yeah,
this is not. You lose a lot of the soul of your deck there, I feel like, because then it's just like, how many good cards can I run? And I just really much prefer the synergy, which is why I love Kark Sakashima, because I'm playing a bunch of random ass flip cards that just turn into a CEDH deck because you get a critical mass of them. That's why I love the deck. I don't think I could just play like a standard like Blue Farm where I'm just playing like a good card trying to combo off.
Luckily the more Wizards
game.
Yeah, luckily the more Wizards keeps printing cards, the more the higher card quality we're going to have. And eventually we're going to make it's going to be to where you can run those monocolor decks and they're just as powerful as the 5-color decks. Maybe not just as powerful, but you know what I mean? Like, they're going to be more on par because they're going to be printing cards that are just obscenely powerful, and they're able to be, because there's only 100 cards you could put in a deck, and eventually over time we're going to, it's not now, but over time we're going to get to that point where, every deck, no matter what the color, is going to be able to perform at that maximum potential.
Well, like I said, it's funny because you've got again, back to where we originally started at our Khans of Tarkir draft. Some of the cards you were drafting in there are vanilla creatures. This year, we have now gone to sets where there's not a single vanilla creature in the entire set. That is how much the power level is continually going up. And I don't say that as a negative. I actually think that's a good thing. I think that those sort of interactions and the building around cards that do something instead of just looking at power and toughness and how the math works out, I think that's what makes this game classic and timeless. Is that my experience is going to be completely different from yours because I build around a certain set of cards that says this, whereas you build around a certain card set that wants to say this. It's what I think ultimately makes the game timeless and why I'm excited for the next couple
Yeah.
of years, because I think
Oh, yeah.
I think the landscape is going to change drastically because they have to continue to up the ante and make cooler and funner
Yeah.
keywords, and no telling how it's going to interact with like what we have now. It's just
Exactly.
I think it's like the best time to be a Magic player nowadays.
Yeah.
Is
Interesting.
like
That's interesting.
we're in an untold frontier.
So with that being said, you're talking about the future. What about this year? What are y'all thoughts on Magic this year?
All right, let me get on my soapbox here.
Buckle up.
Yep.
Too many products. We're getting bombarded by too much shit. I specifically am the well that Wizards is targeting because I am the single idiot with the good job that just can basically has an open wallet and says, "What shiny thing are you going to print for me next, Wizards of the Coast?" And even I am to the point where I'm like, I'm having a hard enough time keeping up with what is getting printed, what is in this set, what do I want, that sort of thing. And again, it's funny because it's a dichotomy because I love that feeling because I'm like, I get all these new shiny toys that I can do whatever I want with. But I also understand it's, again, I put myself in somebody else's shoes that loves this game that doesn't have the disposable income that I have. It's like I don't know how anybody can keep up with where we are currently at because there is just a bombardment of cards and things, which again, I like that we do collector stuff because that gives an avenue for me to spend my money and support the game that I love. But I do think that they're being too, this is a separate point from just product, but I think like master sets have gotten insane, and you have seen why Commander's Master specifically has done very poorly because they're overpricing regular cards. The product itself needs to be cheap and accessible if you want a game to be successful. People need to have the game pieces to play the game, which is why proxying has become so popular nowadays and why I support it, because ultimately I don't, I'm not looking back to our spell table game. I don't want to come into a spell table game and you not be able to compete because your wallet is thinner than mine. I want you to have access to all of the game pieces so you can build the deck you want to build and I can play against it and we can actually see what kind of game of Magic we're going to have. So
Yes.
my two takes are, please stop making so much premium product and put reprints in regular $4 sets so people can actually afford the fucking game pieces so we can actually play a game of Magic together, and maybe slow down a little bit, just a little bit.
Slowing down is definitely good, and a lot of them are for like different formats, like modern, Commander, standard, and then you have all the premium stuff. You have all the secret layers, which arguably like 60% of them are, in my opinion, aren't like too exciting. I mean, some are, but you're right. It's like they come out with stuff once a month almost now. It makes it less special. I think that if you continue to print so often, I don't know. There's something about waiting for 4 sets and kind of like being in a period where you get to experience the set before a new one, because literally before the set even comes out, there's already spoilers for something else, and it's like your mind can't even appreciate cards that haven't even came out yet, and they're already pushing for new stuff. They want cards to be more exciting. They want them to be more powerful, and they want people to to not be like, oh well, this set was trash and there was nothing in it, and then they can't sell their product because people look at the set and they're like, oh well, this is bad. So maybe you're right, slowing down, having less sets where they're more balanced to where you're not like putting a ton of like good cards into one set and then spiking up the prices of like the boxes, and then releasing other sets with like subpar cards and no one buys them at all.
Well, it's funny because I actually think, like, ultimately in terms of the sets that have come out and the designs we've been getting, I think we're in like some of the best set design and card design we've ever been in the history of Magic. Like, we're getting to the point where there's so many like cool and fun interactions and cards that are coming out that we are exactly where I want to be. I think really the cadence of the cards is ultimately how, like, look at how many games of EDH you play per set release. I really don't get that many games between like set releases. And if I have done updates to my decks, have I truly even tested any of those updates enough to even know that they're good before the next set comes out and there's actually new cards? So really, ultimately, my cadence issue comes down to, you know, it's cardboard. Stop charging so much money for cardboard. People need ultimately access to game pieces. Like, game pieces should just be fucking free,
Yeah.
and you should pay for the fancy stuff and like
Yeah.
the playmats, the accessories, that sort of thing. That's what really should make money. But ultimately, the success of a game is the game itself, and if people are priced out of it, what good is that at
Right.
all? I think that's ultimately why that's not good. But I want more because we're at like that developer high point where, like, we're getting to the point where whether you want to call it power creep or whatever you want to call it, but designs are getting more interesting and better, and you know the metagame completely is shifting because some of these cards are so good. And some people, I understand, don't like that, but I like when things are no longer stale and my decks actually swap up because there's a better card that came out, a more niche card, because that's one of the things that I've really appreciated with designs basically since the Ikoria commander decks, where they printed the you can cast this spell if you have your commander for free, where those are so generically good that they were a mistake because they just go in every deck now. But Wizards has done a really good job as of recent building powerful or designing powerful cards that are extremely niche. And I appreciate that a lot because that just means that I don't need to buy 16 Rhystic Scepters.
Right.
This one card is only good in this particular strategy, but it's extremely good in that strategy. So I really appreciate that's where design is right now, instead of just printing generically powerful blue counterspell like that. That I think is way less interesting than where we are right now in design.
I think we should slow down a little bit. I agree with Blake saying about the design of cards. I think that we are in probably the best time of Magic as far as game design is concerned. Wizards has found their stride with designing cards, and I think that it's too much product. That's basically it for me. I basically agree with all your points. I don't have anything to add to that. I think that green could use a boost of power, but white's gotten a lot of love recently. But
let's explore that slightly. What define to me what you want for green? Like, let's thought experiment time.
Okay, so for green,
Like, are you looking for more stack interaction? Are you looking for creatures? What?
Second interaction would be great.
Well, stack interaction would be great. Yeah.
Well, that's breaking color pie, so you're probably not going to get that. Well, you'll get it in certain shape.
Yeah.
It won't come in the form of a green counterspell.
No, that'd be.
Yeah.
Would you play a 3-mana green counterspell?
3 mana?
Yeah.
It would.
Oh.
Would it just unconditional counterspell?
Yeah, just like counterspell, but 1 green, 2 colorless.
I don't think so.
I don't think so either. So I don't think it's unreasonable to print something like that.
Well, again, but I will say I think it is, because I think the color pie and the limitation of colors is another aspect of design that is good, because if every color could do everything, it loses its identity and it's less cool. Like red is I specifically love I just want to be a game designer. I love what they've done with red, where red now has exile based draw. I think that shit was so fucking smart. Because that red has a specific niche that they now can build cards around. It's not just red can't draw cards. No,
they need
red
to print
can
more.
draw cards. It's just you're you're building a deck around
Yeah.
it specifically. You shut up. But like I like that design choice is one of my favorites that they've done in the last 2 to 3 years. Is pivot red into exile based draw and like until my next turn cast kind of thing. I love that specific design, and I think and actually to your point, I think green could use an interesting new niche. I just don't know what it is because me not game designer. So
Me not game
but-
designer.
so I really I could see green coming up with some niche because right at this
Well, I
particular
think
juncture,
green's
just drawing
niche.
cards around creatures
Yeah.
is really their niche.
Right there, that, and I think that green has really over the last couple of years has got some sort of like fight or punch kind of niche. Which I mean they do have.
It's too easy to interact with. That's my
Yeah,
problem.
yeah.
Because like
Yeah.
it requires the creature to stay on the battlefield. Otherwise, you're getting 2 for 1, and that
Yeah.
is that's horrendous outcome.
Yeah. That's about all I got for the year of Magic.
This is the last topic that I have.
Hot takes?
Yeah, hot takes.
I have a hot take. This actually
Alright.
goes against what Blake was saying earlier, but I think people run too much removal.
Too much
Okay.
removal.
I think people run too much removal, and I think there's a balance you have to have because what removal is interaction with your with your opponent's board state.
Mhm.
What it isn't is progressing your own board state. And I think people they run too much removal and they take away from the fact that they're progressing their own board state towards a win. For instance,
agree with that, but I think that goes back to I think people play stock standard removal and don't consider removal that could be also considered synergy
Yes.
pieces.
Sure.
You know, if I'm just like, well, I'm in a white deck, so I've got Path to Exile, Swords to Plowshares, Generous Gift. Those usually don't build around specific synergies. Those are
Mhm.
just good, efficient removal pieces. But if you start to look at 3 and 4 mana, creatures, artifacts, enchantments that could be warped to a synergy that also interact, I think that's where you can increase your count of interaction and not hurt your overall game plan. You just have to actually be a good deck builder and not just go to EDH Rec and be like,
Yeah.
what do I put in my deck, internet? Because I can't think.
Yeah.
That's a hot take. I think that people are not prepared for. Then I made a short about this. How EDH Rec makes lazy deck builders. They just go on there.
100%.
I think it has its place, though. I definitely.
Oh yeah, especially for like newer players.
I wouldn't want it to go anywhere. I love a database
Yeah.
to know what people are playing in decks,
Mm.
but I think people use that again.
Yes.
Ultimately, again, back to the roots.
Right.
Competitive 60 card format. I am perfectly fine with net decking, but you need to understand your deck enough to know why
Right.
that deck builder put those cards in the deck and what they're for, and then that way you can then build off of it. You can add what's correct for your meta. You can do this. You can change your sideboard, that sort of thing. The same thing's true for EDH. If I go to some stock standard EDH build or EDH rec and I, look up the most recent commander and I just take all of their, cards off the screen, it's going to be a much worse deck than if I actually thought about it and did my research and went to Scryfall and actually looked at all the cards that could interact and that sort of thing. So people, 100% EDH rec makes people lazy because they don't actually think about how their deck interacts.
Yeah.
They're just like, that's how you end up with just 100 cards of good stuff because EDH rec looks at all the staples and they pull the numbers and that sort of thing. So like you could have 2 different decks, but they're all building the same staples, but they've got their different little synergy pieces that one another don't have. So the numbers on that don't look as high, but those synergy pieces are what actually make the deck work and churn.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't have them, your deck is significantly worse for not having them.
Yeah. Building your own decks from scratch has taught me a lot about kind of like what y'all were saying, how to synergize with all the cards that you have, how much, with your game plan, how much removal to have, and not relying too much on like staples, but being like, okay, well, this card is good, but is actually good in my deck with the other cards that I have. There could be something.
I have a great example of this. and this was specifically called out on EDH Rex a video a long time ago. But Chainer Nightmare Adept that came in I forget which precon it is. That specific deck, if you go to its EDH page, has Flayer of the Hatebound in it, which is a 6-mana 4/2 Undying that basically does the Warstorm Surge, but when it enters the graveyard. But what people, and again, horrible for the deck, because if you don't know what Chainer Nightmare Adept does, you can discard a card and you can cast a creature from your graveyard. That does not enter from the yard. That goes to the stack and then enters the battlefield. So people are just playing it because they don't realize that interaction is actually a non-bow. And that even came from the goddamn Wizards precon, because they also don't sometimes think. But it just goes to show that if you look at EDH Rec and you just build decks based off of it and you don't actually understand what your cards and interactions do, you can just put together a deck that doesn't even fucking work. So ultimately, when it comes to deck building, actually do research, look at your commander, understand what your niche is and what interactions can be done around it, and then build your piece around it. Don't just look at the color identity and just say, all right, I've got 30 cards that are guaranteed to go in this deck, because that's not necessarily true. Staples are good for certain reasons, but they're not good for others, and you need to understand when they are good and when they're not good.
Yeah, I've definitely experienced that with my Yasova deck, which is long gone. But I think that I had very little. I mean, it was around the theme of threaten, taking your creatures, sacking them for value, stuff like that. But I played so many staples in that deck that the deck just didn't make any sense, and it just wasn't good. It just wasn't good. And what made it even worse was that people knew my game plan off the bat, so they were just like, "Yeah, this guy's gonna take my creatures." So not only was Yasova getting killed a lot, the rest of my deck wasn't getting anywhere to it, because it was just packed full of the best red, green, and blue spells, and it just made no sense at all. And I was like, I'm just gonna retire this deck.
Just a deck building thing of redundancy. If you're built around a certain thing and only your commander can do that thing, your deck is inherently flawed, because you need to think about, in that scenario, Ryan's on Yasova. I'm a creature-based deck. He's going to take my stuff, so I don't want him to have Yasova, which means you need other pieces. They're going to simulate that, so you can still enact your game plan. Now, your specific scenario, you're more just built around staples, so really being Yasova and having people think that means your deck is actually worse, because you're not really capable of that game plan, but you're getting punished for that game plan.
Right. All I'm saying, y'all, is that this podcast is something that I've been looking forward to for a long time. I know that, things have been kind of hectic, kind of crazy, but we're coming back in full swing. I'm already moved. We got the set gameplay for Ixalan coming out for y'all. We're working on it whenever we start to get those spoilers coming out and everything, everything like that. But also too, I want to take this time to just shout out our patrons. The humble 3. Rome wasn't built in a day. That's all I got to say. But Brian Chambers, Jay Giggs, Drew Garth, thank you so much for continuing to subscribe to our Patreon. If you haven't subscribed to our Patreon right now, we just have a standard support tier. We're trying to think of some ideas that can benefit you, maybe at a higher level. Right now, we just have a standard support tier. So, if you wanted to, the link will be in the description below. Also, too, all of our decks on Moxfield, the Brothers War EDH Moxfield, that link will be there as well. You can take a look at maybe some of Chris's fringe decks. I believe that we got a couple of Blake's decks on there. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. We're going to be here for the long haul. We're very excited for everything that is coming our way. We got Blake back. Y'all been asking for Blake. We got him back. He's here. Listen, the man is busy.
He's got the
flow. I mean, he's literally flying out somewhere tomorrow, but he took time out of his busy schedule to be with us low tiers on this podcast. So Thank you, Blake. Thank you, Chris. Thank you all. Y'all have a wonderful day. We'll see you next time.